In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful, and may the peace and blessing of Allah be upon his last and beloved Messenger Muhammad, and may the peace and blessing of Allah be upon you all. This is the second episode in a series entitled Examples from the Quran. And in this episode I will show the example of the home of the spider. Allah the Almighty states in the Noble Quran, in the last revelation of Allah God to people, in chapter 29 verse 41 the following, in translation the following: the likeness of those who choose other helpers than Allah God is as the likeness of the spider when she takes unto herself a home, and though the weakest of all homes is the spider's home, if they but knew. So in this Quranic verse, Allah God Almighty draws our attention to the home of the spider. Now in the Quran, in the last revelation of Allah God to people, Allah states many examples like the spider, the camel, the bees, the mosquito. Now Allah states these examples for us to ponder upon them and to see the knowledge we can learn from these examples. So in this episode I will concentrate on the knowledge that can be learned from the home of the spider. Now if we look at the home of the spider's web, we see the design of Allah God Almighty, how Allah inspired the spider to build such a magnificent construction. Now to understand the knowledge behind this spider's web, the home of the spider, we need to ponder upon another verse in the Noble Quran, which is verse number 7 of chapter 40 of the Noble Quran, where there is a description of the angels for Allah God Almighty, where they say that Allah God encompassed all things in mercy and knowledge. So the angels describe Allah that He encompassed everything in mercy and knowledge. So it's interesting to note that the angels, they said that Allah encompassed everything in mercy and knowledge, and so the word mercy preceded the word knowledge. And this means that the knowledge of Allah God Almighty, that the mercy of Allah God Almighty precedes His knowledge. For example, when Allah God Almighty decided to create the human body and to create the bones, the skeletal system, the framework of the body, now the mercy requires that this framework, your bones, should be as light as possible, such that there is no fatigue in carrying this framework around. Now this is the mercy requirement. Now comes the knowledge of Allah God Almighty to show this mercy requirement in the fact that He created human bones from a ceramic material, and a ceramic material has the characteristic of being stiff, strong and light at the same time. So we see how mercy becomes creation. The mercy requires it should be light as possible. Now comes the knowledge of Allah God Almighty to show this mercy requirement in the fact that He created bones from a ceramic material. Now applying this to the spider. Now the mercy requires, when Allah God Almighty decided to create the spider, that the spider should be able to travel along the web from point A to point B in minimum time, minimum effort. Again, the mercy requires in the creation of the spider and the spider's web that the spider can travel on the web with minimum time and minimum effort, which means that, for example, he can reach his food in minimum time, and there will be minimum effort in doing that. Now that's the mercy requirement. Let's see how the knowledge of Allah Almighty came to show this mercy requirement. Now, as you can see on the screen, this is a computer model showing the main links in the spider's web. If you look at the spider's web, these are the main kind of links in the web. These lines represent the main links in the spider's web, and they are attached at their ends. So if we make a computer model and fix these links at their ends, as in the spider's web when it links to the walls or a tree, etc. So these ends are fixed, and here I put a weight at the center of these webs, at the center of these lines, which represent the weight of the spider. So imagine that there is a spider sitting and standing on the middle of the web. Imagine that there is a spider standing at the middle of the web, putting a compressive force downward. Now when the computer solves this model, it gives us a value of displacement equal to 17. So when the spider is standing and and the spider is placed at the center of the web, then there is a downward kind of deflection equals to 17 units. Now this deflection, if it stays there, imagine the spider is walking on the web, and if we have large deflections downward, then that would lengthen the path. So a longer path would take more time and more effort from the spider. Once again, if we have these large deflections when the spider is walking on the web, this means that the web is deflected. There's large deflection in the web, so there's a longer path. There's a longer path for the spider to walk along, and thus there is more time, more effort to the spider. Now, how Allah God Almighty reduces these displacements, causing the spider to go in a straight path, minimum time, minimum effort. Now, if you look closely at the spider's web, we see that Allah God Almighty put crosslinks. There are crosslinks between the main supports of the home of the spider. So there are crosslinks, as shown on the screen, between the main kind of lines and the main links in the spider's web. Now if we repeat the solution, now fixing the web at the ends and putting a weight representing the weight of the spider in the middle, but now with the crosslinks. Now the computer gives us an answer of displacements around 8 units of displacements. So in the first case, without these crosslinks, we had around 17. Now we have 8. So it's about 50% reduction in displacements. So we see the magnificence in the design of Allah God Almighty for the spider's web. By putting these crosslinks, the stiffness, the strength of the spider's web increased by 50%. So there's a reduction in deflections by 50%. These crosslinks, they reduce the deflections in the spider's web, and thus we have the shortest path between point A and point B on the web, shortest path, minimum time, minimum effort. So we see how the mercy requirements becomes creation, and we now understand why Allah God Almighty, the main quality of Allah is that He is the most merciful. Now let's repeat this exercise, this problem, with another case of putting the spider, the model of the spider, not in the middle but off the center, putting the spider's weight off the center. Now when we put it, this case, without the crosslinks, just the main supports in the spider's web, the computer gives us a value of deflection around the 12 units of deflection, as shown on the screen. Now if we repeat the same exercise, but now with cross webs, the computer gives us a value of deflection equal to 6. So again, there is a 50% reduction in deflections, thus there is a 50% increase in the strength of the web. So we see the design of Allah Almighty for the home of the spider, to give the spider maximum comfort, minimum effort. So we see the mercy of Allah Almighty, and how His knowledge, how the knowledge of Allah Almighty shows His mercy in His creation. Now, what are the technological kind of applications of this? Now we learn from the design of the spider's web, Allah Almighty teaches us that when we construct structures, we need to put crosslinks between the main supports. Now in a structure we have, for example, columns that bear compressive loading, or we have links that bear tensile forces. We need to put crosslinks between them to stabilize these supports and to strengthen this structure. Now this fact, civil engineers now, they employ in the designs, they put in the designs these crosslinks. But we see that Allah God Almighty teaches the believer this from the Holy Quran, because Allah God Almighty wants you to be the teacher of others and not the one at the receiving end. Allah wants the believer to be the teacher of others, and He does not want you to be on the receiving end of matters. But we see, because of the majority of Muslims, they deserted Allah the Almighty and they went away from the Quran. They find themselves in pain and despair they find themselves into. So we see, brothers and sisters, the amount of knowledge we can learn from pondering upon the examples of the Noble Quran. And to know more details about this topic, please visit my website at www.quran-miracles.com, and you can email me at zaidquran@gmail.com, and may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon you all.